Hey guys, how you going? Hope you're all doing very well. This evening I'm going to be doing another movie review for you all, so hopefully you find this one interesting. This movie is a crime film from the UK, English language, released in the year 2020, directed by Philip Barantini, and this film is called Villain. So Villain is about this man who has just served a 10-year prison sentence and he's being released, and he comes home and he wants to start his life over. So he wants to reconnect with his daughter to make up for lost time, and he's going to live with his brother until he can find his own feet. But unfortunately his brother has got himself into some trouble with the local gangsters, which forces this man to relive his past and basically get into the world that he's so desperately trying to get out of. So whether or not he can stay out of trouble is something you're going to have to find out for yourself, because that's as far as I'm going with my synopsis. Now my thoughts on Villain. Philip Barantini is a very interesting director. Now this is the second film of his that I've seen. The first movie I saw was called The Accused, which is a movie about stereotypes, racial stereotypes, and how people react to things on social media. I'm not going to give too much away about that film, so I haven't reviewed it yet, but I will get on to reviewing it fairly soon. And so that movie was very interesting. Although that had glaring problems, I still thought as though it was worth the watch because it was actually quite suspenseful. So seeing that Villain was directed by him was an incentive to go and see the film, but the biggest incentive for me to see this movie was the fact that Craig Fairbrass was actually starring as the main role. Now Craig Fairbrass was Pat Tate off Rise of the Foot Soldier. That was what I thought was my first introduction to Craig Fairbrass, until I realised that he was actually one of the villains of the movie Cliffhanger. He was the Englishman off Cliffhanger, and I didn't realise that. And so it wasn't until I saw Rise of the Foot Soldier that I was reminded of Craig Fairbrass, and I thought to myself, that kind of reminded me of the guy of Cliffhanger. And yes, it is actually Craig Fairbrass in Cliffhanger. So Cliffhanger was my introduction to this guy, but it wasn't until Rise of the Foot Soldier that I actually really understood how good an actor this guy is. He plays a hard man very, very well, and so coming into Villain, I thought it was going to be another sort of Pat Tate sort of character, so I was really interested to see what Philip Barantini could get out of Craig Fairbrass in this type of film. So he does play a villain and a gangster very, very well, and so those two incentives to go and see the film, I was hoping that this is going to be a fantastic experience. And although at the end of the day it wasn't a fantastic experience, I will say that it's still very impressive, and it demonstrates what Philip Barantini does very well. And what he does very well, he keeps the audience on the edge of their seat. Although a lot of what he does is generic and you've seen it before, you still feel as though you're captivated because the writing is very, very good. And Craig Fairbrass delivers a knockout performance as this guy who's trying to redeem himself in the eyes of his family that he hasn't seen in a long time. And I thought as though the interactions between the family and himself were very raw and very gritty and also very realistic. And so I thought to myself, okay, he's genuinely trying to get back with his family, but his past is holding him back. And when he realizes what his brother is up to, you see that this is a guy that will protect his loved ones. So he is a very charismatic sort of character, and that character, you go on the ride with him and you want him to redeem himself, you want him to see and go on the straight and narrow, but unfortunately, as I said, your past can catch up with you. It's not very easy to steer clear of your past and go down a different path, and so this is a torment within this character, and it's a psychological battleground. And I thought as though Craig Fairbrass demonstrated that psychological battleground very well. He didn't need to tell you what he was feeling, it was all through the emotions and the body language, and that is down to the fact that the writing was very good, and it showcases how good Craig Fairbrass is as an actor. So overall, I thought as though the villains in this film were fantastic. The gangsters, I thought they were very menacing, and that's another plus that this movie has. You actually have a menacing gangster or a menacing sort of bad guy. You can feel as though there's a strong fear factor there. So if things don't go well, there is a level of intimidation, and so the movie does get very dark. There are moments that I thought were very disturbing. It doesn't overdo the violence, which has much more of an impact, and so it forces you to use your imagination, and that can be far more terrifying than actually seeing what's going on. And so I thought that was all very good. And the overall end of the film, I thought, all right, well, that was a satisfying experience. And so it's an experience that I would highly recommend, especially if you are a fan of Craig Fairbrass. This is a guy who is very underrated as an actor, and it's just another example of how good he is as a character in the underworld. He is different from Pat Tate in Rise of the Foot Soldier. This is a guy that is very, very likeable, but has a strong level of intimidation about him. And so you feel as though, okay, this is the guy that's going to save his brother. This is the guy that's going to go into the underworld battle and beat the bad guys, but because it has a strong level of realism, I thought as though, okay, this is not a caricature sort of revenge film. This is not a caricature guy who's a one-man army. This is actually a real person. And so the strong level of realism is something that Philip Barantini does very well. It was something that The Accused did very well. It's a very realistic sort of portrayal of, themes that movie depicts, but it just depicts it in a way where you feel as though, okay, this is not theatrical. This is not an entertaining sort of film. This is a movie where it feels as though this could be a real life story. And so that was all very good. The pacing of the film, it does go quite quickly, so it doesn't outstay its welcome, which is something that I appreciated. But unfortunately, the reason why Villain doesn't succeed as much as I wanted it to is the reason why The Accused didn't succeed as much as I wanted to, because although Philip Barantini executes his movies very well, it still has a strong level of generic quality to it. I feel as though these are movies that have been recycled before. The formula is very, very similar. And so because of that familiar way of storytelling, you always feel as though you're one step ahead. You know how this movie is going to finish. And although the movie, The Villain, actually surprised me with how it finished, I still thought as though, alright, there wasn't enough of a risk to really create a mood of its own, to really create a shadow of its own. So if you are a fan of crime films, why would you go out of your way to see Villain? And the answer is you really wouldn't. And because of the fact that, as I said, it does borrow a lot of what you've seen before, and yes, it does it very, very well, and it is a very soul-searching sort of emotional film because of Craig Fairbrass's performance, but unfortunately it is a run-of-the-mill sort of gangster sort of redemption type of film. And so that's something that I didn't like as much, because I thought as though, alright, it's not taking many risks and it's not taking me down unfamiliar territory. It's always that familiarity that prevents it from being as suspenseful as it really could have been. And also Craig Fairbrass's character's brother, I thought, alright, there was no real redeeming qualities about him. He became very, very irritating. So I didn't really get that connection with older brother and younger brother, the love there. I thought the chemistry didn't work as well, because the younger brother, he has put, the cat amongst the pigeons. He's made this situation worse, and you keep thinking to yourself, I want to see this guy punished, instead of his older brother saving him. And so Craig Fairbrass's character, I really gained a sympathetic quality to, but I just didn't really sympathise with anything that the younger brother was going through. So I thought his character wasn't as well written, and I thought as more attention to that character and fleshing him out in a much more three-dimensional shape as well actually would have made it more impactful. And so that was something that I didn't like. So pushing that aside, it's still a film that I would highly recommend, especially if you are a fan of Craig Fairbrass. If you like your gangster films and you want something with a lot more realism, then Villain is definitely one I would recommend. Not perfect, but certainly you could do a lot worse. And so overall, I'm going to give Villain 3.5 stars. Alright guys, that's it for my review. Hope you enjoyed it. Till next time, keep watching movies, and I'll see you later. Bye.